Hey geeks, welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter, and I'm glad you're all here. I miss you all. You know, we haven't had a show for a little bit over a month. That's the longest we've ever gone. So I'm sorry. That's what happens sometimes when things are crazy and I have trouble finding speakers. But this will also be the last show of the year. We'll pick up at the first weekend in January. So I'm glad you're all here. I hope you had a wonderful month or so off. It kind of lets you know what I've been doing the last month or so. We had an election in America, if you didn't hear, which was pretty crazy, I guess you would say. And it finally got over last week, I think. So I'm glad it's over. No more elections for 2 years. I'm so happy. I started a new contract job 2 weeks ago, so I'm very happy about that. My birthday was a little over 2 weeks ago. We had Thanksgiving a little over 2 weeks ago. I've been sick, unfortunately, and so it's been. I've been doing a lot this last month or so. Not all that I wanted to do. Like being sick. It's never fun when you're starting a new job and then you get sick. But so far, I haven't got any flu or anything like that. Thankfully, I'm still healthy with that kind of stuff. If you notice, I'm wearing a Granite State Code Camp shirt today. I wanted to say thanks to Jim Wilcox for sending me this shirt and also this awesome hat. I was going to wear it, but as you can see, as soon as I tilt my head up, the visor goes away. So I can't wear it on the show, unfortunately. But I want to thank Jim. I spoke at the Granite State Code Camp last month. And what happened to my screen? It'll come back. I spoke at the Granite State Code Camp last month. Come on, screen, come back. What's going on? Hold on a sec. Sometimes my computer kind of goes wonky on me. What's going on? Can't see my screen. It's going to be tough to do the show without a screen. I'm really, really sorry, everybody.
David, you can restart and come back until then I can play the intro video.
Really? Are you going to screw up my last show of the year? Come on. I'm going to wait a couple seconds and we'll have to reboot, Simon. I'm really, really sorry if you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. You can check the chats.
Okay, something's happened, everybody. I'm really, really sorry. It'll just take me like a minute to reboot. Simon, can you talk about CSharpCorner or something while I'm rebooting? Thanks. Hey geeks, welcome to another episode of Dog Fooding with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter, and this time I'm going to pick on the app from Netflix on my iPhone. So I recently got back from a trip from India, and before I went, I downloaded some movies onto my app so I could watch in the plane. That worked fine. But when I got to India, I was having some space issues on my phone because of WhatsApp, and so I deleted some of the downloaded episodes, and I wanted to re-download them before I left from Delhi, come back to America. Well, guess what? First off, the Netflix iPhone app doesn't work in India, or it doesn't work for me. I don't know why, but it just flat out wouldn't work. It wouldn't pull up anything. I couldn't download anything. Nothing worked. I'm about to show you my experience there, but also when I came back, I'm experiencing the same thing. So the first thing I want to show you is that I can't even get the list of shows to come up on the home page. Hey everybody, looks like I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I have an older computer and an older laptop, and I've never had the screen just fart out like that and not come back. Usually it comes back after a couple seconds. So I totally apologize. I was thinking, it's not a good demo unless it fails. So it's not a good show unless it it fails at the beginning, I guess. Anyway, I also wanted to say that I really miss Simon. I haven't talked to Simon in a long time, and him and I have chats after the show that I really do enjoy. So I wanted to finish off my thanks and everything with thanking Simon and all the hard work that he does for the show. One other thing, I was cleaning up some stuff, and I found a $25 gift certificate to Olive Garden. So any of you enjoy the Olive Garden here in America, shoot me an email, and the first one that gives me an email, will email it to you along with some swag from my website and all that other kind of stuff. So apologize for everything going down. Hopefully it won't happen another time today. Really, that would really suck. So my guest today is Shay Rojansky. He's a principal software engineer at Microsoft, specializing with entity framework and databases and things like that. So we're going to have a great discussion about all those things. And if we can get to it, we can also talk about maintaining an open source library, which I do, which isn't the easiest thing in the world. And so maybe we can get to talk about that today. We'll see. It really depends on your question. So make sure you ask questions, start asking questions now, and we will get to them as much as we can during the show, because this is really your show, everybody. It's not my show, it's yours. I do this for you, to help you in your career. And I do it, I guess, a little bit for myself to give me something to do on Saturday mornings. Okay, so let's get going because we missed a little bit of time there. I want to give a shout out to the Ukraine, of course, and all of our friends and followers there. I know they've been hitting my website, so I know some programming must be going on there, but unfortunately, they're 9 months into this, it looks like, and nothing's. And now they're in winter, and I don't get to experience cold winters here where I live in San Diego, California, but it does not look good there. So please, give your thoughts and prayers to the people in Ukraine going through this terrible thing, and let's get this over with as soon as possible, because I want to go back to Ukraine. I loved being there in 2015, and I really, really do want to go back. So please keep them in your thoughts during this holiday season. Also, the kids from India, website, was there, and I'm still raising money for them. So you can go to that link, or you can go to the Voice of Slum every month. So, and the two founders just recently got married, and congratulations, everybody. Chandy and Dave, who just got married. I wish you an awesome rest of your life together, and I know it'll be great because you two are two of the nicest, most inspiring people I've ever met. So, congratulations on your marriage. But where was my light? I love Indian weddings. Anyway, please think about the kids in India during this holidays. A little bit of support. I also, this last month, I released a brand new version of Engine Networks .NET 6, .NET 7. There's some improvement. Sorry, Simon, my signal's weak. I don't know what's going on. Maybe my reboot did something. But if everybody can hear me, okay, Simon, that should be probably good enough, I guess. My new release of Spargen's out, and I hope you go check it out because I work really, really hard on it. I'm in Usex. So hope you check that out. I have a brand new article out on CSharpCorner. It's called benchmarking your code like dotNetDave. So if you don't benchmark your code at work, you're not releasing software correctly, in my mind. I find things even in Spargen by benchmarking code, and because it's being hit millions of times as opposed to one time with a unit test. And I found some issues I've had to fix in my own open source library. So you should be benchmarking your code before big releases. And so this article will help you get started. I actually created a NuGet package to help you in your benchmarking journey. It's full of collections that are pre-generated that you can use with the unit test and lots of other helper methods. It all works with benchmark.net. It generates all the reports that you're going to need, sets everything up, at least the way I do it. So I hope you will check out the article. If you have any input, please let me know. I'm always trying to make this better. And so I hope you'll check out the latest article on CSharpCorner. All right, with that, I want to introduce Shay. Shay is a principal software engineer at Microsoft working on .NET Data Access, Entity Framework, and perf. Perf is something you all know that's a big deal to me. He's a lead dev on Npgsql and PostgreSQL provider. And welcome, Shay.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Sorry about the hiccup at the beginning. That's never happened. I've never farted out during a show. So
as you say, if it doesn't have a fail, it's not a good show. That's just how it is.
So this is, I guess, after 70 shows, I've had to have at least something happen, right?
And it had to be on mine.
Yeah. I'm just so glad all my guests have shown up. That's like my biggest fear, that they're going to say 5 minutes before, "Oh, I can't make it," and I'm going,
yeah.
What
I
do
hope
I
that
do?
never happened.
I know.
No, I'm here.
So far, now that I've said it out loud, it's probably going to happen, right?
Yeah, 71. That's when it's going to happen.
That's right. My first one for January. It'll be a great start to the year. My guest doesn't show up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, how are you doing? Where do you live?
I'm good. I'm in Berlin. I've been living in Berlin in Germany for the last 4 years. I'm a bit of a nomad, so this is the longest I've been in a single place in a long time. In fact, it's a bit scary for me. It's already 4 years. I used to travel around a lot, but yeah, I'm in Germany for the past 4 years and loving Berlin.
Oh, that's great. I'm thankful you're taking part of your evening out. Not as bad as Simon, where it's 11:30 at night, right?
But that's even worse.
Yeah, that's even worse. Poor Simon.
You know how it is. So most of my team, most of the EF data team is in Seattle and Redmond, obviously. And then that means that a lot of my evenings are taken up by calls and various things because, time zone stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah.
Yeah. On my new team, we have some people, some contractors from all around the world, and they kind of the same thing. They can only attend meetings at the very beginning of the morning because it's their bedtime and everything. So that's the world we live in now in software engineering. With the global the global workforce, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing thing. At the same time, sometimes in .NET we have to coordinate. There's people in New Zealand, people in Europe, and obviously people in Redmond and Pacific Standard Time or whatever it's called, and juggling that without somebody having to wake up at 3 a.m. is not ideal. But that's as you say, that's the way it is.
Yeah. And even at my new job, because they work on Central Time, I really should be getting up an hour or so before I do, but I get up just before the stand-up meeting, and at 7
just put on a shirt, right? Like nobody's looking below.
That's right. Grab my coffee and go to the stand-up meeting, and then make my breakfast and everything after that. But in the same vein, I'm really thankful that we have a career where we can do this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. I feel very, very, lucky and privileged, I guess, because we can go anywhere we want. We can, if you don't like living in California, then move to a different state. Who cares these days?
100%.
Not all companies embrace that. And unfortunately, I've been seeing some companies sliding backwards, after the pandemic, which I think is really not good for them, because they're going to lose the good employees, right? And be stuck with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so,
I mean, that was all the more, exactly. During the pandemic, we could just work, we could just do our thing. Like at least in my case, again, as you say, not all companies did that so much, but in software engineering, in principle, you're supposed to be able to do this. We were the least affected, maybe, of any type of work, right? Whereas other people could not work, physically could not, with the lockdowns and all those things, right? So yeah, absolutely, incredibly privileged.
Yes, but and that's one thing I do, because I've been working at home pretty much nonstop for 10 years now, I guess. And
wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, and I love it, and not only because my health is better, my mood is better, and all those kind of things, but I get more work done. I get a ton more work done at home than I ever did in CubeLand.
CubeLand. I've not heard that before. That's a new one for me.
Well, those big open cube rooms where
the image is very clear.
It's I mean, I was, the last company I worked at that did that, I was just so depressed every day. As soon as I hit the front door, the depression just came over me, going, oh man,
that's not good.
And my productivity went down to like 20%, right? And so I don't know why some companies do that. I know where it came from, but I don't think that works. At least for our job, it doesn't work. Maybe for other jobs, call centers or stuff, maybe that's okay. But, for our job, I can't concentrate in that kind of environment. Right.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I told you the show can go off rails. And so before it really goes off a rail, let's start talking about something. Let me get to the chat to make sure, see if anybody's commented yet.
Sure.
No comments yet. So make sure you send in your questions for Shay about databases, performance, open source software, and we can attack them during the show, because we only have 40 minutes left now anyway. So what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about database performance first, or the journey any framework has gone through? What's your pick?
Whatever you'd like to start with. I'm very flexible.
Well, I'm always big up with performance. So
okay. I mean, So I'm in the .NET data team, the team that does performance. I'm sometimes kind of like the perf guy. So I'm the person most focused on perf in the team. Although perf is something that absolutely everybody has to think about all the time. Perf can never be something that one guy does. It doesn't work that way, right? It's a very cross-cutting concern, but it's very, very close to my heart. And in fact, I originally got into Microsoft through the perf hat, let's say. So when I've been at Microsoft for 4 years, and there's this thing, I'm guessing you've heard of it. There's a thing called the Tech Empower benchmarks, which is a set of these kind of industry standard web kind of benchmarks, where there's a standardized set of these benchmarks, and across all languages, all platforms, like a very diverse kind of thing. And when I was joining, there was this goal of having .NET in that benchmark and be obviously in the best place we can be, right? And one part of that involves obviously a database. And at the time, I was working on the Postgres database, the driver for Postgres. If people don't know, Postgres is one of the major open source databases. It's like SQL Server. It's like the same kind. It's a relational SQL-based database. Anyway, I came from that world. I'm a Linux guy. I'm not at all a Windows guy. I'm actually a hardcore kind of Linux person. And I was kind of specialized in Postgres at the time. And one of the reasons I got into Microsoft in the first place was doing perf work on the database driver, so that, you know, in the benchmarks and everything, so that we could say we have a very good stack, like in terms of performance. So that subject is extremely close to my heart, and there's not been, in the last 4 years, there's not been like a release where, you know, we haven't done a lot of work on performance, and I haven't been involved in it very specifically. Yeah, I mean, usually like to dive into it, usually when people think about perf, like when you read Stephen Toop's, you know, blog post on .NET and so on. So the main thing that people think about is runtime perf, right? It's about taking your program, looking, you know, profiling it, seeing where, you know, where your code could be more efficient, right? And that is obviously very important. And that's also a big part of what I do as well, especially on the lower level work. So on the, let's say the low level SQL database driver, a lot of it is also about that. It's about eliminating stuff you don't need to do. But when you do databases, you also have like you're working at a higher level as well. So you have other aspects. A lot of work, especially like in the recent EF Core 7 release, for example, like an ORM or a database driver can do more round trips to the database than it absolutely has to, right? Which is a different concept of perf. You're not profiling and like removing or doing, you know, better code. You're thinking more about how much networking, you know, how many round trips around the network you're actually doing. And if you've screwed that up, if you're doing more round trips than you have to, then that's you know, that's going to be typically more significant than any micro optimization you can do in your code, right? Because you're going all the way to the database. Databases now are in the cloud, right? So latency has become longer. You want to really, really keep those round trips down. So that's like that was a big part of what I've done for the EF Core 7 release was killing those extra round trips that we don't actually have to do. And then there's another even higher level aspect of perf, which is, you know, when you do an ORM like EF Core, what we do is we generate SQL for you, right? You express what you want to do in the database via link in .NET. That's how usually that works in the .NET world. And then it's our job to provide to generate the SQL for that. And we have to do that. We have to generate the highest quality SQL, obviously, which is going to perform the best, right? So once again, if like EF Core's runtime performance is extremely tight and great, but the SQL you're generating is kind of bad, then that's not going to help anybody. In fact, that's far worse. Like the SQL you're generating is far more important than any, like, you know, micro optimization you're going to be doing inside EF Core.
Yeah, that's that, you know, that reminds, you know, you reminded me of the very early days of Entity Framework, because I've been working with it ever since it was in beta. And I actually used it along with some other Entity Framework features to create the first, you know, public, I guess, API for a company here called Mitchell International, and I architected it and wrote the whole thing. And I remember I wrote 90% of it. I remember back in especially the early days, you know, I would spend a lot of time with EF because I preferred to use the, you know, link to EF provider. You know, instead of writing, you know, instead of learning another querying language, I just use link, right? And so I spent a lot of time, you know, during that project, you know, changing how I did the link into the link statements, and then seeing the SQL that EF would output, right? So I was always always monitoring, you know, watching SQL Server and watching the SQL that was coming through. You know, then I would take that and look at the query plan it created and see if it was the best one. And if I wasn't happy, I'd go back and tweak my query a little bit and see how that would help, you know, one way or the other.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time in the early Entity Framework days doing that. And also with that project, you know, one of the things I did was any third-party company that wanted to use that API, they would have to submit their code to me. And I would have to approve it before we would let them on our platform. And a code, you know, of course, it wasn't all written in .NET. It was written in whatever language they wanted. But, you know, the number one thing, and I'm going to ask you a question about this in a second, but the number one thing that I was basically forcing them to do in Entity Framework, through REST API, was to do batching, right? Because I wanted them not to go across the wire any more than they have to, because I know the tendency with developers, you know, to not think about that. And so I forced them, you know, to do that. And I would not approve their app unless they did it, right? Because, you know, and this was 14 years ago. So our servers weren't as powerful as they are now. And so I had to be really cognizant of, how many, things can we process through a single server at a time and all those things. And so, yeah, that's super important with databases. And that's one thing I like about, database people coming on the show is that, because I do talk about perf all the time. I have a conference talk. I'm about ready to release my new book on the subject. I tell people one of the biggest, I think the number one perf issue in all apps is the internet, right? That to me, that is the biggest one, right? And after that, to me, is the database, right? Because there's so many things that you can do incorrectly to really dramatically, hurt your performance in databases.
Absolutely.
And if you don't tackle that part, you can work on the other parts all you want, but it's not going to be satisfactory.
Absolutely.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's all a matter of, knowing where your bottlenecks are and not working, not like, prematurely optimizing stuff that doesn't actually matter, right? Like if you're making your program faster, but its database access is crap because it's not doing it correctly or whatever, then that's not going to help anybody, right?
Yeah.
It's extremely, that stuff is extremely important. And by the way, I love what you said about, you have your link queries and then you look at your SQL and you look at the query plan. We keep saying this. There's this tendency with EF-Core. EF-Core's great advantage is that it's a link provider, right? Which is exactly as you said. You don't want to learn SQL. You don't want to have to deal with all that complexity, right? So a lot of people kind of delegate that task, which is what we're here for, right? That's exactly the point. But then that doesn't mean that you should not keep an eye on what happens on a lower level, right? That's actually very important when it comes to databases. So we constantly tell people, if you're at all, perf oriented, if perf matters at all to you, which it usually should in most cases, you should be keeping an eye on that SQL, and you should be making sure that things, the number of times where somebody, just does link makes it so easy to forget about stuff like, should I define an index, or am I really expressing, what I want to do in the simplest way, or am I maybe doing it in some convoluted way, which doesn't let EF translate it to good SQL, right? So we're constantly saying to people, keep an eye on your SQL. Don't be afraid, to go down there. And by the way, we were just talking about this. So one thing I love about EF-Core compared to EF6, here's something funny. EF6, if you look at the SQL it actually generated, the approach was that, the SQL people wouldn't be looking at SQL so much. The SQL is more like an assembly language thing that EF6 generates to you. So it's not important for that to be readable, right? Because that's just how EF6 talks to the database, right? So if you look at some EF6 SQLs, like I'm talking about the old ones, not EF-Core, right? You see SQL, which is extremely hard to parse and understand as a human being. It works. It might be even efficient, maybe not, but it's very, very hard to understand. In EF-Core, we've done a lot of, we've gone into some efforts to make the SQL as it is if you had written it. So the idea is also that when you look at the SQL, it looks like SQL you want to trust and you would want to write yourself. And this is also in order to make it easier for people to keep that touch with their, with what their ORM is actually generating. That's important, like in a cultural kind of way, if you will.
Yeah, and that's one thing that one thing I've always loved about being a Microsoft developer for my entire career, basically, is that there's a lot of magic that happens that I don't need to cognitively be worried about every single second, right? But the one thing that, and a lot of that is great. Entity framework was that, right? It was magic, right? You just create a link query and you get your data back. Wow. What an awesome thing, right? And
I still think it's an amazing thing, by the way, after all these years. Yeah. It's amazing.
And it had a rocky start, because it was, it's like anything else in Microsoft. The first few versions, you should kind of be, watching a little more than after that, right? But now I forget where I was going with that. Talking about the? I don't know. Keep going. I forgot where I was going. But so the one question I did want to ask you was, and I get asked this a lot, and I always get kind of this happens to me a lot, especially when I'm speaking, is that there's only so many minutes between two sessions, and people rush up to you and want you to solve all their problems in one sentence, right? And that's really hard to do, right? And so if someone did that to you at a conference and said, so how can I really improve the performance of my database with any framework, what would be your answer?
Wow, that is a very...
It's a hard one, isn't it?
It's a hard one. I wrote a lot of perf. There's a perf section in the EF docs, by the way, that's exactly about answering that question. So typically, like the very first thing is make sure your indexes are right. That's like, if I have to say one thing, just one thing, I would say look at your indexes, look at your plans to make sure your indexes are being used. That would be like my main thing to tell you, basically. That would be my single line kind of thing. But then in our docs, there are also some, like, that's one high level theme. There's other high level themes, like don't fetch data you don't need, like fetch the data you need, don't overfetch.
Only get what you need.
Right. Only get what you need. You shouldn't. That's a general thing. Like even in a web application, you're in a client and a web client or whatever. Don't overfetch as a general thing. Like the network and the processing is it's expensive. You don't want to overfetch. So don't overfetch. Beware of lazy loading, which is a more specific case of don't do more round trips than you have to. That's another like high level theme. So keep an eye on your round trips. Keep an eye on your indexes. Keep an eye on getting exactly the data that you want. Yeah, I mean, I can go on with some of these high level things, like especially if you're using EF Core. That's something that we've now improved in version 7. There's sometimes this tendency when you want to do like a bulk operation, like you want to affect many rows, like in a single operation. Let's say you want to give all your employees a raise or something like this. EF Core has not been very good at doing this, not because of the raise part, but because of the bulk, because of the bulk part, right? EF Core. EF in general has had like another kind of philosophy that wasn't very compatible with updating a lot of rows with one go, with one punch, let's say. EF Core 7, like one of the main features that we've released is about that. It allows you to express an arbitrary update or delete in SQL, basically via link, once again. So you can, rather than loading all that data into memory, changing it in memory and then asking EF Core to persist that back, you can simply express, your bulk operation directly on the database, which once again, it's all about optimizing what you bring from the database and how many round trips you're kind of doing. So it always kind of boils down to the same main principles of, round trips, not transferring too much data, making sure obviously that your database is using indexes correctly and that your SQL is written correctly in order to use those indexes. That would be like, my kind of short, high level answer.
Yeah. You're totally right. And to me, whenever I think about databases, the number one thing I think about is indexes, right?
Yeah.
And because I've been on so many projects where not only do they have incorrect indexes, but a lot of times they don't have any. Yeah, and they wonder why their data is so slow.
I mean, it's so easy.
Too many, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I wanted to say that. So first, it is very easy to just write link, and then I mean, why would you think about indexes, right? I mean, you're just a C# developer using link. In a way, link is a double-edged sword. I have to say this, right? Because it's great. It brings programming closer to you. You don't have to learn another language, but it also is a double-edged sword because it kind of makes it easy to forget about those things. You are coding against a database at the end of the day, right? We're translating that. So indexes are actually important. And what you just said, what we sometimes also see, there can be also too much of a good thing of indexes, as you were saying. So in some cases, you know that indexes are important, so you just slap them on, right? You add those indexes, right? And indexes have a high cost in terms of write performance, right?
Right.
If you're adding a row to the database, now all the indexes on that table have to be updated, right? So there's this balance to be struck between your read performance, which is optimized by indexes, and your write performance, which is degraded by them. And you have to always keep that in mind, how much your program, your workload is more read intensive, more write intensive. It's complex stuff. I mean,
and so for everybody out there that's using SQL Server, I'd like to tell you about a program that I use when I use SQL Server. I'm not on my current project. We're using Postgres, but
yay.
Yeah, Steve Stedman has an app out there called I think it's called the Database Analyzer. Can you look it up, Simon? Steve Stedman, a Database Analyzer, Postgres. And Steve is a SQL MVP, and has written this program I've been using for many years that is, to me, the best program to look at your database and see what's happening at the current time. And not only that, but he finds all the things you're doing wrong and then tells you an estimate of how much that's going to cost you in time and money, right? It's really, really awesome program. I hope Simon can find it so it can be in the show, but it's an awesome program for using SQL Server. Now, the thing I forgot I was going to say earlier is that even though that Entity Framework and other things, you know, in .NET, you do a lot of magic, you know, it's really, and that's great, but you need to understand how that magic works, right? And you just can't say, well, yeah, I use any framework. I have no idea how it works. And, you know, I get my data, I'm okay. No, you're not okay. That you need to understand how it works, because of kind of what I was talking in the beginning when I was using any framework in the beginning, right? I was trying to learn how to do the best link queries to produce the best SQL, to produce the best performance, right? And if I didn't do any of that work, you know, the application would have suffered, right? And so, and that also comes into play when you're interviewing for a job, right? If someone asks you if you know any framework, they just don't want a yes, right? They want to kind of understand how you use it, how you understand it, especially if that team solely uses something like any framework on their team, right? So you need to understand how. I know it, and the more I become the longer I'm a software engineer, the less I want to, you know, dig in on some things sometimes, but that becomes really important, not only for your application, but for the next job you're going to get in 2 to 5 years, right? And and we're talking about indexes, and I'm still trying to learn, you know, databases like Cosmos DB, but you know, it's even harder, you know, with databases like Cosmos DB to figure out the whole indexing thing. It's not called an index in Cosmo, but you know, that whole kind of concept in a NoSQL database is even harder, right? And even more important to get right. Right. And even, you know, Mark Brown, the PM for Cosmos, even gotten after me about my database designs and stuff, because he goes, Dave, you're doing this completely wrong. I'm going, okay, show me what I'm doing wrong, because I don't know what I'm doing, you know, because it's a hard transition when you come from, you know, learning ever since you became a software engineer, relational databases, and having to change over to something completely different. And you have to throw away basically all your knowledge and relearn everything, right? And that's the way I feel, at least. And so and I think, you know, we're going to be using those kind of databases more and more in the future, and we need to start understanding how that works and integrating that into, you know, our teachings and our writings and things like that. So so
it's an interesting. I mean, I'm gonna use that to segue into some musings, I guess. But I mean, you're talking about NoSQL, and there's definitely that trend going on, obviously, for quite a long time now. At the same time, we're also seeing. I'm not against it in any way or criticizing it. At the same time, you also see this kind of trend because of this NoSQL thing that has been happening. You see that all major relational databases have also incorporated some NoSQL concepts basically into their thing. So I don't think there's any major relational database at this point that doesn't support the JSON, like some sort of JSON data type, right?
Column.
Exactly, like JSON columns, which is, by the way, another big feature we delivered in EVE Core 7. That's another, if people are interested, they can take a look at it specifically for SQL Server. So you have this idea now that you want to use a relational databases, but inside have this sort of island of NoSQL, right? Of unstructured, loosely structured documents, which you can query. And all that is kind of like in this hybrid mode where you have that inside like a traditional strict relational schema. And I find that fascinating how I think it's no longer one or the other in that sense, but rather, you know, you're going to be using both things in like large applications. You need some of this and some of that, and you're going to mix and match them together. I find that kind of development fascinating, and you know, in the world of databases. And the same problems with indexing inside JSON documents are also there. Like, how do you index a JSON document inside a SQL Server column? It's
right.
I mean, there is a story there. You have to learn it, like you said, like, but it is there.
Yeah.
It's super interesting.
It's the world is changing pretty rapidly, if you ask me. And like I said, data is always, when I talk about, good architecture and things like that, the first thing I always talk about, the very first, is databases, right? And I relate databases to the foundation of a home or a building, right? And if you don't have a good foundation, your app is going to suck. I'm sorry, and even, this company that I wrote their first API, over 14 years ago, not long before I left, and I've written about this, so I'm not going to tell the whole story. I was in a meeting with a bunch of VPs, and I was getting upset, and my boss saw me getting upset, and he goes, and he wanted my opinion, and then I said, "You really want my opinion?" and I basically said to the VPs, I stood up and I said, "Look, everything you're asking for in this meeting is two things are going to happen. Either one, it's going to be impossible to do, because until we break down and redo this crappy database, everything you're asking for is either going to be impossible or take so long. Our competitor, because there are only two of us that were really big in this industry, our competitor is going to beat us to the punch," right? And they all looked at me going, "What are you talking about?" And luckily my boss said, "Dave has been telling you this for 4.5 years. Why don't you listen to him?" Which of course they didn't. And I'm sure they still have the same crappy database. It was so anytime I see a database developed by a developer, I get really worried. Even though I've developed databases in the past, but we should not be designing databases. I'm sorry, we're that's just not our wheelhouse, right? And every time I see something like that, the program suffers, and the major suffering is coming from the database, right?
Yeah.
That's why even good architects. That's why even really good architecture in databases is as important as applications, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. If not more, more, as you said, right?
Right.
Like it's true that if you have like a fundamental issue in your database design, that can be far more expensive than something similar happening in your application layer.
Right.
Like the very basic thing, right? Application servers can be scaled out easily, right? You can add another one and it's going to work, right? In general, like you can deploy another instance of it. Scaling out your data tier, that is a headache. That is a headache, right? So if you're having like performance bottlenecks there, I mean this is now the cloud kind of seems to help by helping you scale out automatically, but be very, very careful what you do there in general, right? Like if you have a fundamental architecture or design problem with your data, that's something you usually want to think about. Like exactly like you were saying, you don't want to put that off or try to find workarounds for that. You want to actually fix that problem in general. Data is very important. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's another performance thing that I talk about when I talk about architecture, is that you want to get the data as close to the person as possible.
Yeah.
Right? And the cloud does help with that, but depending on whatever database framework you're using, it can be really difficult or kind of easy, right? It really depends on it. Like document-based databases replicate really easily, right? SQL SQL Server not so good, right? And so we have to be cognizant of that. Right.
Yeah, there's of course you can do this, right? Replication and all these things, they exist, but it is a headache. It's like you're getting into another world of replication and mirroring and so on, which is not trivial. You don't want to just do that like without. It's true.
So lots of things about performance. I mean, we could never end up. We can never stop talking about performance.
Give me 5 more hours.
Yeah.
I mean, but I do want to say like one thing which I'm kind of happy about, like after being like having spent 4 years like in the team as well, in the .NET data team. So there's this traditional thing where if you really care about performance, you should be avoiding ORMs, right? There's this idea, right? No, you should write your own SQL. This way you can squeeze out all the perf and everything. And I get that. And in some cases that's also true. I don't think it's false. And by the way, way, I'm not like specifically an EF guy necessarily. I'm a data guy, and there's other solutions in the ecosystem for doing, data in .NET, and EF is just one of them, and we love the others as well. There's another one called Dapper, which is a way to execute SQL. It's a so-called micro ORM. You write your own SQL, but it helps with stuff like the deserialization and serialization and so on, the materialization. And what I do like about what has happened with EF Core, if you compare to EF6, to the old EF6, then in terms of performance, you could see a very, very big impact. The old stack was slow. It just has to be said. It really was slow. And that's the world where this kind of myth came out of, that ORMs are necessarily these big behemoths that add a huge amount of overhead, and that's partially true. But what we've done also in the last few years, we focused very much on the ORM performance. I think it was in EF Core 6 that we specifically targeted getting our query, our untracked query performance on par with Dapper, like with something written in raw SQL. And we've largely done this. That's basically what I'm trying to say here, is that today you don't necessarily have to choose between writing SQL and being efficient, and using LINQ and all the nicer, higher level things that an ORM give you, and being slow. It's no longer necessarily that choice that you have to make, and we've worked very hard to make that a reality. So I'm happy about that. That's a message I'm trying to send out there.
No, it's true, and there's always trade-offs, right? It's
always,
if you really want to get the last nanosecond of performance, then you're probably going to have to do everything yourself. But if you don't need that, right, then Entity Framework is a rapid application development framework, right?
Yeah,
it allows you to rapidly spin up databases. I mean, use databases, without writing all that plumbing and without writing all those dang store procedures and getting DBAs involved and all these kind of things, right? It's
absolutely.
So there's everything we do, there's trade-offs, right? Even code quality there, or code commenting and things like that, there's trade-offs, right? It's
exactly. I mean, you get, like with EF, you get a static typing, right? Like your columns, they're not strings with SQL, like SQL strings in your code, and then somebody goes and changes the column and your code starts breaking, right? That doesn't I mean, EF doesn't work that way because it's a strongly typed mapping model. So you can refactor and everything, and with confidence that things are going to work, right? That's super important. And I also have to say, like, you're right, there's always an overhead. And sure, I mean, in some sense, if you want like the last nanosecond, you have to write it yourself. But there's also, EF Core can also be good for performance. Like, there's certain things which I'll give you an example, right? Like, how do you insert, like, let's say you want to insert like 10 rows into SQL Server, right? So how are you going to do that in your application, right? I'm not talking about millions of rows necessarily, but your app has to insert like 10 rows into a table. So, I mean, a normal dev would probably do like an insert with 10 values, or maybe they would do 10 inserts and batch them across. But it turns out when you start really researching into it in SQL Server, there's a better way. You can do it with a merge statement that's going to be faster because you're doing some tricks and so on. And the point is that in the EF Core layer, we've kind of looked into all that stuff and we've built it in so that people don't have to look into that stuff, right? It's it's kind of esoteric. Nobody really looks into that kind of thing, but we have, because we're a common like basic component. So if you're just going to write your SQL naively, sometimes you're actually going to get worse performance because some optimizations the ORM can bring, which are actually going to make it faster. So it's a hard question to answer. Obviously, there's no one answer to it.
And that's why you need to understand what's going under the covers, and you need to benchmark and do performance testing on your database, right? Because that's, no matter how much we talk, it really boils down to your application and your data, and you're going to have to do the work to understand all that. So
benchmark yourself on your own data. Precisely.
And so we actually have one question, and that is, would you please provide some guidance around split query behavior? I'm not even sure what that is, and DB context pooling, and whether those options are a good fit.
Sure. So DB context pooling. So in EF Core, every time you want to do something, you need a context, a DB context, right? So usually the traditional ways, you instantiate them, you create the context, you use it, you dispose it. That's the way it's always been. Now it turns out a DB context is a very light thing. It's a very light object, right? It's an in-memory thing. but it still has a cost. And if you're constantly creating them and disposing them, then the initialization of all the services behind it starts to have a certain cost. So if you're sensitive to runtime performance, DB context pooling is this feature which in most cases you just turn on. It's like free. It doesn't, no effort required on your part. And it makes EF start, instead of disposing that DB context, it will return it to a pool. And the next time you will take it out of the pool. A little bit like you have connection pooling, right? But for the object, for the DB context. So this is a great way to boost runtime performance. I personally recommend, like, anybody who's perf sensitive should activate this feature. There are certain scenarios where it's going to be tricky to do that. If you're in multi-tenant scenarios, maybe it's going to be a bit more tricky because the context is pooled, but you have to have tenant state on it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. In most cases, it's just a thing you turn on. So that's one thing. That's a very nice runtime perf feature. It just makes your code faster. Split queries is another kind of perf feature, if you will. So in principle, if you're in EF core and you're accessing two tables, let's say you have blogs and you want to also get the posts associated to those blogs, right? By default, EF core will generate a join, like SQL joins, right? What's like an inner join, an outer join, like the most classical thing. In many situations, a join can be a problem. For example, if you do two includes like at the same level, you hit this infamous Cartesian explosion thing. You get everybody knows, like everybody who's done a bit of SQL is aware of this horrible thing, right? Cartesian explosion, where you get a cross product of all your joins, and basically you're bringing back a huge amount of data from the database. It's exponential, right? It's really bad. So instead of having EF generate a join to get your blogs and your posts, there's an opt-in feature which EF core gives, which is called split queries, which means we'll do one query just to get the blogs, and then we'll do another query just to get the posts for those blogs. And that's mainly in order to avoid this Cartesian cross-product problem, which I just mentioned. Now, it's not always a good thing to do that. So joins are sometimes better. Unfortunately, EF core doesn't have enough knowledge. We can't make that decision for you. You're the one who knows your data, right? So you have to make that decision. I'm not going to go too much into the details. And split queries also have their disadvantages as well. For example, if you're sending two queries to the database no longer provides consistency guarantees across those two queries, right? So one SQL is always going to be consistent in principle, whereas two queries, somebody might have changed something in the middle, and what happens now? You're getting results which are inconsistent between those two things. So it's something that I highly recommend if you're dealing with these kinds of queries. Understand the differences between split and single queries. We have ample documentation on this, and reach out to us, of course, if you need more. And then judiciously, what is the word? Enable definitely split query versus single query based on that scenario that you want. And those two features, by the way, the context pooling and split queries, they work great together. They're completely orthogonal. They speed up different aspects of your database performance.
Yeah, great. I need to. I didn't know about split queries. I'll have to look at that next time I start working with any framework. I forgot what I was going to say again. Gosh dang it! That's what happens when I don't do a show for 5 weeks, Simon. I start forgetting things. But unfortunately, I have to let you go because I'm running out of time, and we barely got to talk about the first subject, and I still have questions for you, so I'm definitely going to have you come back if you're willing to.
Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed this episode. Not only do I enjoy talking to smart people like yourself, but I really like it when I learn something too, right? Because I haven't been using any framework, unfortunately, in my contracts because people, at least the contracts I'm on, aren't using it very much. I usually only do it for my own stuff nowadays. But definitely, if you're not using any framework, I know what I was going to say. You were talking about pooling and context pooling and connection pooling. Here's some advice: don't do that yourself, people. I see so many contracts that hire me, and I see them trying to do it themselves and just having nothing but problems. Let the experts at Microsoft or Postgres or whatever do that, right? Don't do it yourself, because you're not going to make it better than an army of people at Microsoft or people as smart as Shay, right? Sorry. it's not going to happen.
It's
right?
not about being smart. It's literally like, it's my job. Whereas,
right, it's your job.
when you're in a company, your job is not writing a connection pooling component. Your job is to be doing some business, the actual thing that's important for the business, or write your website or whatever. These are low-level infrastructure problems. That's usually not supposed to be, it really is like, that's what I'm supposed to do all day long, is think about these problems and solve them in the right way. It's not about smarts. It's really just about,
because that's it's like talking to Stephen Tobe about memory and performance stuff, right? That guy's the expert.
He knows what he's talking about. You're not
definitely knows what he's talking about, right?
Exactly.
I would not try to do most of his articles. I can't even understand, right? The last one he wrote was like a freaking book. Right.
Yeah,
and it takes me so long to go through
and it gets longer every year. I don't know what's going to happen next year. I'm afraid of that one. I used to actually read through all of that, like the whole thing. This year's I read like specific parts. Now it's impossible.
So long.
I can't.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would, he's the expert, right? That's all he does all day long, and I would always listen to anything he says. Take it as golden. As gold, right? Because that guy knows his stuff, right? Because that's what he does all day long, right?
Yeah.
So again, unfortunately I'll let you go. Simon's going to get mad at me, but I really enjoyed you having on the show. I'll hit you up next year to come back on, and especially if there's a new version of any framework coming out, let me know. And you're welcome to come on anytime you want. Just let me know. Awesome. And the last question I ask everybody is, what do you do for fun that's not coding?
Oof, what a question.
It was in the email invite.
I'm going to keep silent now. That's for your viewers, because I don't have a good answer there.
That's too bad. I just do that because, life is more about programming, and I want to make sure, people know that, we do other things, than.
I'll just say one thing, like you said before, you love working from home, and you've been doing it for 10 years. That's one of the things where that's been problematic for me. So I work from home as well, like for the past 4 years. And that thing of, getting myself away and remembering that there's more to life has become more difficult since
it's tough because now you're in your little, happy place, right? And I struggle with it every day. Believe me, you're not the only one. I still, even though I've been doing this 10 years, it's still a struggle for me too.
It's hard. It's hard.
So that's why we have to think about it and keep doing things. And
absolutely,
that's why I always practice guitar on the weekends, is because that's kind of my thing to, do something besides worrying about my next book or something like that. Right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, have a great rest of the weekend. I hope you have an awesome holiday with out there in Germany, and you and your family. I want to come to Germany someday because my heritage actually is from there. So
please do come visit Berlin.
It's on my list. I actually was in Germany, but I was just passing through, coming from India, in October. But I was in Munich and Frankfurt. But I really wanted. I don't count that being in the country when you're in the airport. Airports aren't the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely not.
All right. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks. Well, that was a really great, I know I haven't done the show in 5 weeks or something, but I'm so happy now. Not only did I get to do the show, but I had an awesome guest, and so thank you to everybody who joined us. I hope you found this episode helpful, and I'm going to have Shay come back on as soon as I can get him out here. Also, I want to talk really quick about object pooling in .NET. .NET has a pooling object, and maybe that's what they're using to the DB context. But I recently wrote an article about the pooling you can do with String Builder. We all use String Builder to speed up concatenating strings together, right? But if you actually use String Builder in a pool, you can dramatically improve the performance of String Builder. Like I'm forgetting, I'm trying to think of the chart off the top of my head, but it's like 2 to 5 times faster if you do that, as opposed to newing up a String Builder every time you need one. So check that article out. It's on CSharpCorner, and I'll be releasing that information also in my new book also too. So I hope you check it out. Pooling can really help. Speed up things. Speaking of code performance, you all know I've been working really hard, especially the last month and a half, but ever since the beginning of summer on my new code performance book. But you can get most of that data right now if you go to that page on my website, and you'll have to subscribe to get some of it. But you can get the latest .NET 6 and .NET 7 performance work I've been doing up there. And I constantly keep that up to date. So, and I'll be updating that with all the latest charts as soon as I'm done getting this book out, which hopefully in a week or so. I'm really, really close. I'm finally done with all the freaking benchmark tests. And I'm just now doing the charts and fixing the text and things like that. So it's coming out soon. Don't worry. I did a poll yesterday. Devs who use Visual Studio, which I'm assuming most of you do you run code analysis and fix those issues before committing code? I want to know, because quite frankly, I don't see a lot of that happening. And so I wanted to see what you guys are doing. So I hope you'll participate in that poll. Here's my geek humor for today. I've run into this so many times. Wow, a different error message. Finally got progress. That's your debugging story right there. That's the fun of debugging, is when you get the same freaking error message for an hour, and as soon as you get another one, a different one, you're happy. You haven't fixed the problem, but I guess that seems like progress, right? So I enjoyed that one. Also, this is, like I said, this is the last show of the year. I've really enjoyed doing this show this year. We've, last season we had 250,000 views of the show. I'm so happy about that. I'm so thankful to Simon and Mahesh for helping me do this show. I just wanted to wish everybody a happy holiday, a Merry Christmas, whatever you celebrate this holiday season. I hope you have a great holiday season, and I hope you have fun with your family and eat some good food and watch some good holiday movies and all that good Christmas holiday stuff. So let me know what you're doing through Twitter or something like that. Maybe we'll talk about it at the first show of the year. But have a great season and be safe. I want you all back for next year. And so I want you to be safe out there too. Okay. So speaking of the next show, it's on January 7th. And so I hope you join me back then. Don't forget, I'll be tweeting about it, of course. Also, as I do every year, every show, please listen to your medical professionals about the COVID-19 pandemic and the flu pandemic. We're being hit with a triple pandemic, or triple virus thing right now. We have COVID, we have the flu, and we have some childhood respiratory issue happening right now in America. And I just saw in the news this morning that our COVID, all those things are up 1.5 times over last week. So please be careful out there. Wash your hands, of course. Wear your mask if you need to. And in the meantime, please donate blood at your local blood bank. All the blood banks are in a shortage right now. They really need your donation. And unfortunately, because of my trip to India, I can't donate until next year. I get knocked out for 3 months every time I go to India. So I'm really looking forward to the next time I'm going to be able to do this, because you all know I really enjoy donating blood, because it helps a lot of people. One donation can help a lot of people. So, and speaking of that, if you donate this weekend and tweet proof of that to me, and live in America, because shipping is so freaking expensive these days, I will send you one of my books and some swag and stuff like that. So right now, go down to your local blood bank and take 30 minutes out of your time and donate some blood for your fellow human. One donation of yours can help up to, I think, 3 people. So that's a great thing if you ask me. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for watching the show this year. Thanks again to Simon and Mahesh for allowing me to do this show. If you have any suggestions on what do you want to hear on the show, what guests you want me to invite, I will invite anybody except for Scott Gu and Bill Gates and Satya, of course, because they'll never answer my calls. please email me at rockingthecodeworld@csharpcorner.com. And with that, I'll see you on January 7th. Happy holidays, everybody.